This is 55 TV. We are at the Aubin Gallery with Piers Secunda. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. And yourself?
We're not bad, actually. We've had a hectic time, but this is how 55 Factory rolls at the moment. First of all, tell me the relevance between your sculptural work or your casts and your screen prints, please.
They're essentially two different strains of the same type of work. Everything that I make is made out of paint. I make sculptures out of paint. The reason I do that is that I don't like having to apply paint to a flat surface, which is traditionally canvas. It limits what a painting can be. So I've got rid of that flat surface and I deal with the paint as a sculptural material. That oscillates between being more sculptural and being more painterly. For me at the moment, the casts which we're surrounded by here are far more on the sculptural side, and the silk screens are more on the painterly side.
There's obviously a relevance between the screen prints being American-based, oil, yeah, and this being Taliban, sort of piece of work. Emotionally, what is that coming from you, and what you're representing in that, saying?
I mean, there is a connection, and the connection is it's not a political thing. I make work that records, but it doesn't take a political position. So when I make work with the crude oil, and the crude oil works in this exhibition are from all over the world. There are some from the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, for example, Canada, United States. The history of the petrochemical age, which is the time during which the oil industry started and continues, through which it continues now, and whenever it might dissolve itself or move on to something more technologically advanced, or different sources of energy, that the oil industry sort of softens its hold on our energy resources. That time frame is what I'm setting out to record with the material that fires it, that produces the energy. And with the Taliban works, what I've set out to do basically is make a record of the physical manifestations of the Taliban's activities. I've also done this with Chinese army bullet holes, for example, and I've had a variety of offers from people all over the world to help me to get bullet holes from people such as cocaine kingpins in South America to warlords in Africa. So in order to produce anything in the first world, you need crude oil, because you can't get the materials, or they can't get to you. It's the lifeblood of our world. So the crude oil works, which are silk screened, are essentially portraits of the world's blood and the history of its evolution and its withdrawal from the ground and its use. And that facilitates everything. So without that, I can't even make those works.
Okay. The images that you use in the screen prints, are they kind of based in America? They're obviously probably dating back to 80 years plus, are they?
Well, the oil industry started about 150 years ago, and the commercial oil industry started in Pennsylvania, and it was started by a man known as Colonel Drake. He wasn't actually Colonel, and he dug the first commercial oil well in Pennsylvania, and that created the first oil boom. At the time, oil was just used for lamp oil to light people's houses. Then the internal combustion engine required the fuel which was available through the cracking of oil into petrol and then later diesel and byproducts like this. So a lot of the crude oils in this exhibition are American. Some of them are Canadian. And the images that are portrayed, the pictures that are portrayed in these silk screens, are the moments at which the oil is discovered, or side effects of the discovery of the oil. So, for example, there are pictures of oil wells in which oil is blasting out of the ground. That's known as a blowout. Say there'll be a Canadian blowout, and it's made with Canadian crude oil. Or in this particular exhibition, a very famous blowout in Saudi Arabia in 1937, the first serious oil find in Saudi Arabia, which was in a town called Dammam, and it was well number 7. Dammam number 7 changed the entire political and economic and energy landscape, probably forever. It meant suddenly that the Middle East was going to be extremely powerful and extremely important to the world. And that has gone on to prove itself. And it's a record of the moment at which the oil rushed out of the top of the wellhead in Dammam.
Talk to me about your sculptures here. How long did you spend in that area, and how emotional was it to be around there to get the cast, or was it something that you were distant from and you had a process to just retain this information to then come back to your studio and do it?
Well, I set out to make the Taliban bullet hole casts because I'd been in China and I'd managed to get some sheets of paint shot by the Chinese army. So then a natural progression for me was to turn up the volume on the work as far as I could, which is kind of the way I do things. And that meant to me to go to wherever I could to get casts of Taliban bullet holes, Taliban being, it seemed at the time, the most sort of serious people around, the people who we were taking most seriously and attending to the most. And so I wanted to go to Afghanistan and make casts of Taliban bullet holes. I felt very removed from it right up until the moment where the aeroplane started to descend into Kabul. Simply because it was totally outside my world, and all I understood of it was what I'd seen in the press and read. And I'd read, for example, a military history of Afghanistan, and so I went with preconceptions, one of which was, what are we doing here? This is an exercise in absurdity. So I took what little I could understand with me, and I went to 2 suicide bomb attack sites. The first one, again, was quite detached. It was on a street which is quite nicely put together. There are trees planted in a nice row. There's a little strip of grass along the side of the road. The building that I was casting the bullet holes from was very nicely painted. It was very smart, very modern, as is a lot of Kabul. And that was very straightforward, and I still hadn't really, it hadn't hit me what had really happened at that place. The second suicide bomb attack site was just, by comparison, horrific. A truck had been pulled up, or a car had been pulled up in front of a building. The front of the building had been blown apart so that in the small hours of the morning, so that the Taliban could go into this sort of U-shaped motel-like building where a lot of Indian doctors were living, who was the Taliban go in, they kill everybody, and then a firefight ensues, which lasts, from my understanding, for the majority of the day, until the security forces and police can get the situation under control. And within some of the rooms in these apartments, I made casts of bullet holes. Some of it was extremely graphic. The likes which I hadn't seen at the first site, for example, strings of bullet holes across a wall. So I was in one of these rooms. It's late August. It's incredibly hot, dusty. I'm in this confined space. There's no air passing through it. There's an unbelievably awful smell. And I'm just thinking, I really need to just get these casts made and get out of this room. And I turned to leave the room, and I slipped on something on the floor. I mean, the contents of this room, and it's somebody's living room / bedroom, are strewn across the floor of this room, and I'm climbing over things to get to the walls. And so I turned to leave, and I slipped on something which I immediately realized was some kind of human remains, whether it was body or body matter, or it was just horrendous. And I had to walk out of that place and just stand outside and breathe some fresh air and look at the sky and sort of pull myself together a little bit, because that really, really unnerved me and unsettled me, and it made me feel physically ill. And it was at that moment that I felt that I was really rather more affected and in touch with what I was physically experiencing, whereas before I was really quite gung-ho, and I was just like, yeah, get to Afghanistan, get the casts, figure out how to make the work with them, And that was the moment at which reality really bit.
So at that moment, it really became a body of work for you, I suppose. Yeah. It wasn't a process anymore. It was actually an emotional connection with the work.
Yeah, and it was a physical experience. It was an auditory experience. There were helicopters flying over a lot, military helicopters, usually in twos. They fly over the city all day long. And then there was this smell of this room, the heat, the dust. It became a very, very real and very unpleasant experience.
Sure. This bodywork's done in this capacity now. Yeah. Whatever you got, and where are you going to extend this on? Is there somewhere else you're going to do a similar bodywork, or in the same way as the emotional content, or just the physical way that you're doing it? What is next?
Well, with the Chinese work, I had people shoot sheets of paint. In these works, I went and cast bullet holes and I integrated them into the work. So the shot works, you see the bullet hole shatter. That's very effective, but the bullets were not fired in anger. They're fired for a purpose. It was deceptive. Chinese army didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know they were making pieces of art. Yeah. They would almost definitely not have done it. But they fired these rifles and they made these bullet holes. Then with these works, there's a level of detachment because the bullets were fired in anger, whereas they weren't in China, but at the same time, they weren't fired through my sheets of paint. So I then make a reproduction of it, so then it's slightly more detached. So it sort of balances. And I'm trying to figure out which is more effective, to cast the bullet holes fired in anger, almost like a kind of archival experience or sort of archaeological experience, to make a record of them in that way, or to take the individual and say, you are, a Afghan warlord, and here is this thing, and you've got a rifle, and police can shoot it. What is that? How do the two mesh together? What is the effect? Is one more effective than the other, or one less than the other? I'm not really sure. I'm trying to figure that out, and once I've kind of really got to grips with that, then I know where to take it. But I've got sort of open invitations from a couple of people to travel, for example, to Jamaica, and have the #1 cocaine kingpin of Jamaica machine gun sheets of paint for me. So, there are options available. I just don't know how that ties into this and whether it's something that I want to do.
Could be a very interesting and exciting project, couldn't it, from here on in? Yeah. Thank you for speaking to us. This is 55 TV. This is 55 Factory.